tell my children, my two children, but how we lived growing up, and not only my children, any children. They look at you like, you have two heads. They figure you got to be lying. There's no way that, you were that poor. You had to have some kind of electricity. No, we didn't. We didn't have. I think I was a teenager before we had electricity in our house.
Wow. And running water, the same thing.
Running water was the same thing. It was well after we had electricity before we ever had running water.
And then hot water.
Hot water, that was a luxury after that again. When I was a kid, the well was about, I don't know, 500 yards or 300 or 400 yards away from the house. Dug well. I'd get home from school in the night time, and my mother, I was the oldest of the big family, my mother would be washing clothes, no washing machine, an old wash tub with a scrub board, an old wash scrub board, and most of the time, like, she'd be pregnant, and sometimes she'd be so pregnant she'd have to stand sideways so her stomach would be clear of the washboard to wash these clothes, and washing bed clothes. No dryer or anything like that. She'd take one end of a blanket and I'd take the other end, and we'd twist it and we'd get most of the water out. And then she'd go out in the winter time. No women around here then wore slacks or anything. It was mostly dresses. She'd go out with a pair of boots on or something and hang those clothes out on a rope clothesline. Had a big wash hung out, and come back in the house, and all of a sudden you'd look out and the weight of the wash, probably the rope broke and the clothes were all down in the mud or something. You'd have to do it all over.
What's going on, everybody? It's Adam here with another video. As you know, I've been stranded out in Nova Scotia, out at the end of the road in the Canso area. But beautiful things happen when you're stranded. You get to know the area better, you get to know the locals better, and you always meet very interesting folks out off the beaten path. So actually being stranded here gave birth to this video and to a series I want to start doing called Unsung Heroes. All throughout my travels all over the place, I meet so many people who give, who contribute, and who are really unacknowledged in general for everything they do. And they don't ask for any attention. And I love finding people like this. They are the salt of the earth. They are great folks, and they're everywhere. We are bombarded constantly with, the billionaire crowd, or the early 20-somethings that are really good-looking crowd. Those are like, the popular figures in our lives, usually in advertisements everywhere. But I'm making this series because I want to counteract that whole thing and find people who have been doing things their whole lives, interesting things, people who have been doing good work for decades, people who have done things and don't really care about the money, don't really care about the fame, those people. And Eldon Munroe in this video is one of those people. It's my first time doing this. It's mostly him talking and saying interesting things, of course. He wrote a book, which is super cool. And for the Stan Rogers fans who have found this video, he was also a dear friend of Stan Rogers, and he has a lot of interesting stories and so many cool little mementos and artifacts and like guitar picks and cool things that Stan wrote out for him, all that kind of stuff that he shows as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and keep an eye on my series I'm going to start. I have a few people in mind. Usually it's going to be older people. And I'm excited to start. So anyways, enjoy, let me know how you like it.
I never intended to write a book, but I always loved history. When I was a kid, my mother and father always told me, don't butt in when older people are talking. But that didn't stop me from getting as close as I could to listen. The old gentleman on the cover of my book, last time I was talking, I think he was around 104, 105 years old. He told me he was 13 years old on the Grand Banks, rowing a dory, ice 2 inches thick on the back of his mitts. He was a small man, but he was tough as leather. Matter of fact, I think when he died, they got me to write his obituary. Somebody got to preserve these stories. So at the time, I decided if someone's got to do it, it might as well be me. So that night I took a pen and I took a piece of paper and I wrote down the names of all the seniors in Dover, from 55 to 60 years old up to 75, and the ones from 70 years old up, made two different lists. I took the list of the oldest seniors first, for two reasons. One reason being they'd had the most knowledge, and the second reason being they'd probably be more likely to pass away and I'd lose it. So I went to them first, expecting that some of them maybe being embarrassed because of the way we had to live. We were poor people. We weren't starving really, but what we had to eat was very limited. And you fed off the land and off the sea sort of thing. So I had a little tape recorder I took with me. And I used to tell them, I told them, I said, I want to hear your stories, how you grew up. This is not for profit or whatever, but so your grandkids and your great-grandkids will know what you guys had to go through and how you lived. And it'll give them an idea, the courage and the resilience you fellas had. And to my surprise, figure maybe, they'd say, I'm not going to talk about it. I had a hard time getting out of the house. Most of them wanted to tell me everything right there. Some person might say, my grandfather gave the land for where the church is on. Now, maybe 2 years after that, another person would say, no, it was this one who gave the land for the church was on. So now you had to go back and try to decipher the truth from which the facts. And that took a long while. I think it was about 13 years or something the time I started. I'd meet some seniors on the road and they say, Eldon, am I going to get a chance to read this book before I die? And I knew then that I was out of a job. The fish plant where I worked had closed. I was out of a job. I had two small kids and no income really. But I knew I owed them that. They poured their heart out to me, so I owed. I borrowed a typewriter from my sister's girl. Didn't have a clue about it. 2 fingers. It'd take me about 2 hours to type a page and I'd have cramps in my back and neck. Then I'd look at the page and it'd all be in capital letters. I'd have to do it all over again. But eventually I had about 300 or 400 written pages, manuscript sort of thing. And when I took it to the captain's office, they said, you gotta have an editor. You gotta get it edited. And I said, no, I didn't have a clue. Who am I going to get? So they named one person, Dr. Ray McLean. He was a retired professor of St. X, and that's what he did in his retirement. That's what he did. And he was the best around. But they also had to stipulate, he'll never do it. Well, I said, why not? Because he's too busy. He just won't look at you. He won't look at you. I found him at his house. He was working at a little garden, flower garden. I walked up and introduced myself and told him what I had done and what I was looking for. He just folded his arms, he let me talk, and when I was finished, he said to me, do you have the manuscript? I said, I'd go better than that, I got the computer disc. He said, I don't want the computer disc. I want if you got the manuscript. I had the manuscript. And I'm wondering what's going on now, because they told me he definitely wouldn't look at me, so I passed him the manuscript and he stuck it under his arm. And then he said, can you give me a week? And I'm stunned by this time. I said, you mean you'll do it? Yes, he said, I'll do it. He said, give me a week. He said, and call me at the end of the week. So I went out and I went back to the casket office and I said, I got an editor, I'll be back with it in a week or so. So the second in command there was, I was dealing with, I think it was Jack McDonald, his name was. He said, who edited your book? So I told him, Ray McLean. He looked up, he kind of jerked his head up, and he said, who? I said, Ray McLean. Anyway, he said, just a minute. So he got up and he went and got the chief, Dr. Gillis, I think his name was, the head guy, come back and he sat down and Jack McDonald said, tell Dr. Gillis who edited your book, and I told him. And he had the same reaction, surprised. And then they looked at one another and they shook their heads. And then Dr. Gillis said to me, he said, would you mind me asking you how much he charged you? I said, nothing. And then they went crazy. They couldn't believe it. With no advertisement, I just put on a community channel, the book is out, the name of it, and anyone's interested, I'll deliver it to you, which I did. And within 2 weeks, the 500 were gone. No advertisement. And there were people, phones ringing constantly. And I was getting letters from all over Canada probably. So I had to go back and ask for more copies. Jack McDonald said, I told you. But he said, what I didn't tell you was, he said, I knew this was going to happen. He said, so I printed 50 extra ones that you didn't pay for, but I got them here. I didn't ask him what he was going to do with them. But I get the 50 and I went home, and within a week they were gone. And then there were still people calling. So I got 200 extra ones printed. So I think that amounted to about 750, somewhere around that. And within another 2 weeks they were gone. And I got a list here now of about 200 or 300 people that are still calling today wanting a copy of that book. But it's so expensive now to get it. We're living off a pension, and it's so expensive now to try to get that printed again. Well, I met Stan back in the early 70s. It was through his aunt, cancer, June Jarvis. She was married to a gentleman called Sam Jarvis, and they loved music, and we used to put on variety concerts for different little charities going on in the village, and she'd attend the concerts. And when Stan began to come home with his guitar, he was just starting out, and he'd bring his guitar, and of course he was looking for someone to play, accompany him or jam with him. So June would call me, and we'd go out and we'd have jam sessions. It was almost as if then I had a curfew at 12 o'clock in the night for me. It was pretty well over. But Stan and those guys would be going till a lot later than that, really. But I'd look forward to it. Yeah, every time you come down, we usually used to get together.
It'd be usually every summer or so?
Yeah, every summer. Sometimes twice a year. Sometimes it all depends on what area or what he was doing in the area. Yes.
And when did you realize that he had something special?
Oh, I knew that. First time I sat down alongside of him, I think he was playing the Guild guitar then, and he just started singing these songs. And I mean, I love all kinds of music. I love country music, bluegrass music, folk music. But when Stan sat down alongside me, I think the first song he ever sang for me, I think it was Fogarty's Cove. And I mean, it was just something. It was just the energy. And when he was done, it was almost as if he was out of breath, sort of thing. Then soon as that was over, then I think he sang a ballad or two. And to me, when he sing those ballads, I mean, you get the chills, the hairs are standing up in your arms, sort of thing. He just have songs that it was hard to imagine. A young guy, you know, being young as he was, how he could write things that were about the past that were so accurate, and things about the future that were so prophetic. I mean, it just amazed me. When I think about it today, you know, I kind of realized then that what I did was kind of idiotic. He sang 2 or 3 songs for me. One was Fields Behind the Plow, and I think California was another one. And when he sang Fields Behind the Plow, it just knocked the crap right out of me. I said, Stan, would you put that on tape for me? He said, yeah. He said, you got a tape? I said, yeah, I got a little tape recorder in the car. Now here's a man getting ready to make an album, you know, and he's going to put these songs on tape for me, not knowing, you know, that I could send these songs to someone else. But he did. I think he put Fields Behind the Plow and California, and I think there's another 1 or 2 on there.
Take the wife back
hearing the studio version of, you know, technology taking over. You're hearing the raw Stan Rogers sitting alongside of me, singing those songs. He sang a song, Waltzing Matilda, and we were sitting alongside one another on Chesterfield there and so forth. And it's a long song. I mean, there were other people in the house at the time, his relatives in the house at the time, of course. They were having drinks or whatever. So after he finished the song, and like I say, the story about the war there in the Australian regiment and going getting blown to pieces by the Turks. But anyway, I said, Stan, I said, would you consider writing that down for me one of these days? He said, I'll do it now. Which I didn't expect, because I mean, they're in the midst of a party sort of thing. And so he hollered to his Aunt June. Aunt June, he said, could you get me a paper and pen? Which she did. She brought the paper and pen. And he left the room, went out in the kitchen by himself. And he wrote that whole song down. I think there's 3 pages there. And told me where to put the capo and what key it was in. And then he signed it at the end. And I used to keep it in my guitar case. And after a while, I began to realize, especially after he passed away and everything, what that would have meant to a whole lot of people, and me playing in different concerts and different venues and leaving a guitar case there with that in it was inviting disaster sort of thing. So I took it out, and I took it to the school. It was just in the ordinary yellow paper. I took it out to the school, and I got them to cover it with plastic, whatever it's called. Now I don't keep it in a guitar case any longer.
Good idea.
He said, I got a new song here. Listen to this one. Well, then after a while he said, hey, come on, how come you're not singing? I said, hey, you nuts? I just brought the guitar to have an excuse to listen. You know, and he used to say, the only difference between you and I is that I'm in the Union. I said, no, there's not a hope in hell if that's true.
When did you catch wind? I guess it was 1983 that he passed away.
Yes.
How did that happen?
I was working as a rigger we had a fleet of 15 deep sea trawlers, and there was 3 or 4 of us splicing wire cable and making nets and stuff for those called riggers, marine riggers. I was working one day and I got a phone call, and it just took a while for it to sink in, and well, it didn't only ruin my day, it just ruined the rest of my month, year, whatever. It just hard to take in. And that last concert, there's a picture in that book in Caryville, Texas, and I got the book. Diane, Ariel, his wife, brought me this book after he. There's a picture of him playing in Caryville, Texas, and that night a lady sketched a picture of him in concert, and she brought it to him and showed him, and his mother brought me a copy, and she told me that when the lady brought the picture to Stan, and he asked her if he'd make so many copies, like for his family and one for me, and Stan's mother and father brought me the picture you see on the wall there. But
Yeah.
and then when he left, if he'd have came back the same night that Garnett and those guys left, he'd have been alive, most possibly been alive today. I had a big male St. Bernard dog that, like I told you before, he was a humongous dog, and you couldn't road train him for cars. He did no fear of a car, and I didn't want him walking out in the middle of the road and I'd have to pay for a Cadillac or something to run into him. So we had a corral made. A corral made outside the house there. Keep him in. He had lots of room to roam, but Stan would come, and Stan was 6'4", and Stan would stand by the fence, and the Ranger, the dog's name was, Ranger would stand up, put his 2 paws on each one of Stan's shoulders, and he'd slap that big tongue up and down his bald head and his face, and the drool from the dog would be running down Stan's face. Didn't faze him a bit. can edit this if you want, but the first time I ever smelled weed was Stan.
You should tell that story too. It's legal now, eh? Is it?
It's comical, you know, but being down this end of the country in those days, I mean, marijuana wasn't all that prevalent. I mean, there were certain guys had certain ways of getting it, but we were sitting on, it wasn't on a chest, it was just on a kind of a bench like thing that June had in her handmade in her home. And the window alongside of it in the summertime, the window was open, it was warm. And after a while, Stan said, Eldon, he said, I got to go outside. He said, have a puff. That's all, a cigarette for me. He went outside, and where he was standing was like by the window. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, the sweet smells coming into the window. And I'm wondering, what in the hell is he smoking? Realized after a while, not at the time even, I didn't ask, but a few years later, or a few maybe months later, whatever, when it got more prevalent around this area, I knew then what he was smoking. It made him sing better.